Hi there, welcome to ET Now and to the special show on the tariff impact that India is going to see as US has implemented that 50% tariff on Indian exports, which is now a reality. Now, in a major shift in global trade dynamics that's unfolding today, the United States has officially implemented a sweeping 50% tariff on Indian exports. Now, at 9:30 a.m. as of today, 50% tariffs on Indian exports to the United States have come into force.
Absolutely right, Kanishka. In fact, starting today, thousands of Indian goods spanning textiles, gems and jewelry, shrimps are now facing steep rise in tariff rates when entering the U.S. markets. In fact, this escalation in trade between the two nations is the big story of the day. And in fact, to discuss more on what could be the possible impact on India's overall GDP, on the economy, how the government is going to wade through this challenge, and of course, what can exporters do now? In fact, we're now joined on this broadcast live by Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar, who's a former ambassador, is joining us. Also joining us is Sakshi Gupta, principal economist at the HDFC Bank. Thank you very much, Sakshi and Ambassador, for joining us here on ET Now. Let me come to you, Ambassador, first. India has stated over and over again repeatedly that its domestic interests will not be compromised, and autonomy as far as its purchase of energy trade with Russia will not change. And top political leaders have echoed those thoughts as well in the past couple of days. How do you think the Trump administration is looking at this tone and tenor that's coming in from the Indian administration?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sumita, for having me on your show. These issues, both as far as, not compromising with our strategic choices, because that's very important, for a large country like India, we cannot have any other country to, determine what our foreign policy choices are going to be. So I think that is very, very important. That has been a critical element, a crucial pivot as far as our foreign policy is concerned. And the other issue on, as far as the red lines are concerned, on certain aspects of agriculture, on dairy, on, GMOs, and on the small scale industry. Those red lines have also been very, very clearly articulated to the United States, not over the last 5 months, not over the last 5 years, but much longer than that. And there has to be an understanding of that as far as the United States is concerned. So I think the fact that we have dug in on both these cases, the message would go out very clearly to the United States that, all this coercion, all these threats, all this.
Right, so that's the word coming in. But Sakshi, let me come to you now. The GTRI estimates, we'll talk about the GDP growth in just a bit, what kind of impact this is going to have on India's GDP when it comes to the tariff. But economists have been saying that it's going to be a growth to, India's, it's going to be a challenge to India's growth. So any particular sectors, apart from the obvious ones that we've discussed, that is jewelry, pharma, auto, and, shrimp, any other sectors where you think there's going to be a larger impact?
Right. Look, I think we have to first understand, the broad numbers, right? So we know that the US market, accounts for about 20-25% of India's goods exports. Out of this, about 30 to 40% are actually not coming under the 50% tariff. So we are essentially talking about, 50 to 60% of our total goods exports that are being hit by these, this elevated 50% tariff as of now. Within that, I think there are, of course, these larger sectors, like you mentioned. One clearly is gems and jewelry. You have, electrical machinery. We do also kind of export, things like organic chemicals, a little bit of iron and steel, automobiles, leather, footwear. I mean, all these segments are, of course, there. The good news, so here in most of these sectors, of course, the impact, will be, in the near term will be significant, because I think it will be difficult to find replacement demand. And given where tariffs are for our peers, of course, this is a very, very big advantage for India's export competitiveness. But at the same time, I think the fact that large sectors like pharma, electronic, semiconductor, as well as petroleum are now, for now have been kept out of these tariff, increases. So I think it is, you're absolutely right that of course there is going to be a large impact on exports. I think I'm also concerned about the second round impacts of these tariffs and how that flows into the economy, both in terms of, investment sentiments, future capacity expansion plans, and these are all more medium-term impacts, that can kind of play out, and then consequently also on the job market, particularly in sectors that are very, very labor-intensive.
Absolutely, Sakshi. So labor-intensive sectors, whether it's related to gems and jewelry, leather, and of course textiles, are going to be hard hit. In fact, we're learning from some export promotion missions, in fact, export councils, that this is going to lead to severe losses of jobs, and in fact, some MSME exporters could also shut shop. We'll have to see what the government really does in order to sort of aid these exporters. But Ambassador Sajjanhar, how soon do you think these talks between India and the United States now getting scheduled, given that the last round of talks, which was slated to happen on August 25th, those got cancelled?
Yeah, I would sincerely hope that, the talks can be rescheduled, restarted. You would know that, under the 2+2, we had the intersessional talks. So it's not as if, discussions between the two sides have completely come to a stop or a standstill. We had on the 25th, 26th, we had this intersessional talks on 2+2, where representatives, senior officials from India's Ministry of External Affairs, India's Ministry of Defense had meeting, met their counterparts from the other side. So I would sincerely hope that on trade, etc., these tariff issues, the discussions can take place pretty quickly, because I think the message now would have gone through that India is not going to bend. The misconception, it appears to have been in the United States, that like all the other countries, they are bending, they are genuflecting, they are bowing down to the demands of President Trump, whether it's Japan, South Korea, EU, UK, all of them are doing it. So India will also sort of, come around to that. But India has now sent out a clear message, and I think we have also drawn up our own, plan in terms of how to deal with it, deal with these issues, and meaning if there's interest, we could discuss that. But, these are issues, let's face it also. About 6 years ago, we faced the same thing when GSP was withdrawn from India. So, the tariff benefits that many of the Indian products enjoyed, about more than $6 billion of exports, they were covered by the GSP. That has gone, and we have been able to sort of,
Right.
deal with it. We have had the worst sanctions imposed on us in 1998. Right. India was a much poorer country, much weaker country. I think we can handle these. Of course, there'll be challenges, but we can handle them.
Absolutely, Ambassador Sajjanhar, and the Indian government is looking at diversification to at least 50 countries which have been identified for exports diversification. And of course, there is a move by the government of India, at least there is a plan to boost domestic demand as well. But let me ask you, you say that, these talks will happen and we'll be able to wade through the impact, at least, over the next couple of months with these, plans that the government of India has. But what will it take for India and the United States to resume these talks? Of course, over the past couple of days, we've seen that a new envoy has also been assigned for India. He's slated to sort of assume office in a short while from now. And then, of course, the 2+2 dialogue has also happened. So that perhaps is an indication that the United States is looking at achieving a thaw between these ties. But what will it take for the two sides to come and talk once again and to start these negotiations? Because as of now, we've been told by sources that consultations are going on at the moment.
Yeah, as far as back-channel discussions are concerned, I'm sure they are on. We might not sort of, come to know about it. It might not be on the front pages of newspapers. But I'm sure that back-channel discussions are going on and at senior official level. And I think here this message also would have gone through, as I said, to the US administration, to the senior echelons of the US leadership, that these are absolute, as far as tariffs are concerned, these are absolute red lines. And on the other issue of Russian oil, that is not a trade issue, that's a geopolitical issue. And conflating that with tariffs, India has said that this is unfair and, uncalled for. But of course, India is now getting ready to deal with it. Now, you're right in terms of, suggesting that these talks, because once the realization comes to the United States that India is not going to, wilt under this coercion, under this pressure, I'm sure they will also come around and start having discussion, because India has really proven that we have negotiated in good faith on tariffs. You would recall that whether it was Bourbon whiskey or it was on this taxation on data companies and so on and so forth, even before the Prime Minister went to the United States on 13th of February for discussions with Mr. Trump, we had taken many of those actions. And on the industrial goods and other areas, we are very willing to negotiate. We have negotiated in good faith. So I think this is a point that we need to bring home to the United States, that on a large number of areas, we have agreed to sort of, bring down the tariff, because we realize that for our own competitiveness of our own industry, we need to reduce tariffs in a large number of areas to become a part of the global value chains, global supply chains. We need to become more competitive. We need to bring down our tariffs, and which we are doing. And whether, it is in terms of tariff negotiations with US or otherwise, I think going forward, this is the way. So we need, even as far as this crisis is concerned, we need to get an opportunity out of it. But those are a few of the red lines. On many of the other agricultural areas also, we have been willing to discuss with the United States. In fact, our imports of agriculture into India, they have been increasing. So I think once this message goes out very clearly, and also that the rest of the strategic partnership between India and United States has to be preserved, and the tariff issue should not expand so much as to completely cloud over the whole relationship. I think the seriousness in negotiations will be visible.
Right. So the seriousness in negotiations between India and US will be visible when it comes to tariff negotiations. But Sakshi, let me come to you now. Let's also discuss, the overall economic impact that this whole move is going to have. We've already discussed sectors, but the Global Trade Research Initiative, their research sort of estimates a potential 0.4 to 0.5% haircut on India's GDP growth. Now, does this align with your estimates as well? And which are the key indicators that we should be looking at to track the effect, that impact that tariffs are going to have on India's economy?
Right. Look, if our estimate for, looking at what will be the impact of 50% tariffs on India's GDP growth for FY26, that is close to 40 basis points lower compared to what our baseline forecast is right now, which is 6.3%. That being said, I think, we also have to appreciate the fact that there are going to be certain offsets, when we are measuring or forecasting GDP growth and economic momentum this year. And those offsets include things like, the rural economy doing very, very well over the last couple of months, and we expect that momentum to continue going forward. That tends to have spillover effects for, certain MSME sectors as well. Secondly, the government has already spoken about GST rationalization, which is due to come, over the next 2 or 3 months. And that in itself is likely to, in our, estimate, is likely to provide about 20 basis points upside, cushion for consumption demand and overall GDP growth. Third is that, of course, as you discussed earlier, that, it is very likely at this stage that there will be some amount of counter-cyclical fiscal support in some shape and form that will come in the near term for, exporters, perhaps MSME exporters in sectors that are being hit severely by these tariffs. So I think to some extent that is, something that will cushion the impact as well. So look, when we are talking about GDP, overall growth, I think there are so many levers that we have to, kind of consider. And while the tariff impact, keeping everything else constant is, as I said, about 40 basis point lower in our estimates, I think that there are certain offsets that could also play out and need to be accounted for.
Right, Sakshi. In fact, we'll come to you in just a bit. We have to cut across this bite by Ajay Srivastava, the founder of Global Trade Research Institute. In fact, Mr. Srivastava talks about how will these additional tariffs be impacting different sectors. Let's listen in and then we'll head back to the discussion.
Yeah, the problems with many sectors is that the share of US as destination market for India's global exports is very high in some of the sectors. These will be affected mostly. For example, for diamond, gems and jewelry or gold jewelry, the share of US is about 40% in India's global exports. So till now, the products were going to US at 2 to 3% tariffs. Now suddenly more than 50% tariff will be applied on them, 2-3% plus 50%, 50 to 53%. So they will be totally outpriced. So competitors from say Thailand and many other countries, they will be replacing most of the Indian exports. Some of the diamond people, they may be shifting their operations say to Belgium to cut and polish large value diamonds and exports from there to the US. So it will be a loss for them. Second, we can talk about textiles and garment industry. Here also the exports to the US is more than 35% of India's global exports. This will also be affected, and India's nearest competitors in the US market for textiles and garments are China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and all these countries, they face far lower tariffs than India will face. So most of the Indian products will be phased out from the US market.
That's the word coming from Ajay Srivastava. But moving on, Ambassador Sir, let me come to you. Now, do you expect a situation like China for India where tariff penalty was pushed aside for 90 days? Could that come about? Is that a likelihood that, could happen? Of course, the duties have come into effect today, but going forward in the week or maybe in the coming months, do you think there could be some extension going forward?
Well, Kanishka, if such sort of a respite had to come, it could and should have come a few days ago. Now that the tariffs have really been put in place, now the only next step would be as to how these tariffs can be removed. They can be moved out of the way. So this temporary reprieve that many people were speaking about. I think that we have passed that moment. These tariffs have come into place. Now, basically, what we need to do is look at direct bilateral negotiations with the United States to get these out of the way. Meaning, of course, 25% is one thing, and then 25% penalty tariff, what is called the secondary sanctions on account of import of Russian oil. I think those are, somewhere which, as I said, are not really based on tariff negotiations, but on geopolitical considerations. So, we can see what comes of that. It really depends to quite an extent on what is the state of bilateral negotiations on ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict between the US, Ukraine, and Russia. So we'll really have to wait and see how that goes. But, rather than, in my view, rather than looking at whether they can be taken off or otherwise, I think we really need to dig our feet in and, exactly as the Prime Minister has been saying, as far as our own domestic consumption is concerned, focusing on Swadeshi, what you have spoken in your own program, as far as GST reform is concerned, PLI is concerned, some other radical reforms economic reforms are concerned, put them in place. And of course, diversification of market. Our second, as is known, US is the largest export market. 18 to 19% of our trade and of our exports in goods goes to the US. Next is the United Arab Emirates. We have a very good FTA with UAE, which was concluded just a few years ago. We have a new FTA with the United Kingdom. Hopefully within the next few months, that will also come into operation. We are into very serious negotiations with the European Union. So I think there are all these. And of course, when the Prime Minister had gone to Brazil on Mercosur, we have been speaking on GCC, FTA with GCC, we have been speaking. I think those need to be fast-tracked. We need to take them forward so that, as has been mentioned, there are these 3 or 4 issues, of course, sectors. Of course, these are labor-intensive: textiles, garments, gems and jewelry, shrimps. Autos are still exempted. Electronic components are still exempted. There are pharmaceuticals are still exempted. So I think there is still a possibility of, about 40-50% of our exports of about $85 billion staying in place. But I agree that, the sectors that are going to be impacted are labor intensive, are MSMEs. But the government has also promised, the RBI has also promised that they will step in. So at least the impact on the common people, that will be ameliorated to quite an extent. I would hope so. And then, I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach as far as dealing with this crisis is concerned. But once again, we have dealt with such crises in our relations with the United States earlier, both in the economic field as also in strategic and geopolitical field. And I'm confident that we'll be able to handle it quite effectively this time also.
Right, sir. Right, Ambassador, we'll be able to wade through this crisis, whether it is through domestic reforms or perhaps, diplomatic level engagements that are also currently on between India and the United States. Sakshi, let me come to you. What can the MPC strategize now on, given that the overall impact of these tariffs could be inflationary as well? So does that change MPC's stance and, of course, the direction in which it's been headed over the past couple of months?
Right. I'm not necessarily sure whether the impact of these tariffs for India are inflationary or not. And if you look at the inflation momentum in India over the last couple of months, things have been very, very comfortable because food, which is usually a big problem and volatile and brings a lot of volatility to inflation, that has been, inching downwards with a lot of healthy supply in the market. So I don't think that at this stage, inflation per se is a problem for India. In fact, if we do see the GST rationalization and the reduction in GST rates over the coming months, that is another thing that could kind of pull down the inflation trajectory over the next, 8 to 12 months. I think from a MPC perspective, what now would be critical is really assessing the impact of growth, from these, higher tariffs. And to that extent, I think over the coming weeks, if we do not actually see any sort of softening or reversal in the tariffs that have been implemented, I think the chances of the MPC looking at perhaps softening policy further through another rate cut in the October policy, I think the chance for that is now gradually increasing. Because I think from the inflation perspective, they do have leeway to bring down the policy rate a little bit further. But I think the question now really is how we start looking at economic activity and some of the high frequency indicators over the coming weeks. And if there is a sense that there is a considerable, slowdown that the economy is moving into, then I think that the chances of a rate cut increase, going forward in the fourth quarter.
All right. Thank you, Sakshi, for that opinion. But on that note, Ashok sir and Sakshi, thank you so much for joining us and helping us with all the inputs and discussing the impact that these tariffs are going to have on India's economy and the diplomatic ties as well. On that note, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, that's all the time we have on the special edition of the tariff impact that India is going to see. Samita and I will take your leave. See you next time.